So when we look at our actual fabric now, Miss T drew this earlier, and as you can see, the shape is different. And that is one of the reasons that we hold off and do fabric last, because fabric moves very easily. So the folds, that if you sketch them out in pencil earlier, they might look a little different. So you want to come in and do this final work right before you start shading, okay? When you look at fabric, you're going to notice that fabric has two things that are really predominant. It's going to have an elevated highlight. And what I mean by that when I say elevated highlight is that when you look at a fold in fabric, the area that is highest and closest to your light source is going to get more light than the areas that are not close to the light source. So it's an elevated highlight. The other thing that you will notice is that somewhere near your highlight, there's going to be a shadow. It always happens. So let's look at a piece of fabric and see if we can find that happening, okay? For example, if I look right here, there's a highlight on this back piece of fabric. There's a highlight right here, and right beside of it, there's a shadow. There's a recessed area. So when you start out your fabric, most of you have started doing a base gray, kind of like the one that Miss T has here. When we are doing this and starting with a base gray, the next step is going to be to search for highlight and the shadow. So I'm actually going to come in now with my pencil eraser. You could use the actual larger classroom erasers if you choose. And I'm going to have to redefine my folds because they've changed since this fabric was sketched. So I'm going to come in and I'm actually just going to draw with my eraser. And I'm going to kind of draw in what I see. So right now I'm working on this area right here because everything got shifted. So I'm coming in and I'm looking for highlight. The only charcoal that's been applied so far is, guess what kind? Who can tell me? Vine, perfect, yes, so you always start with vine. So I'm coming in and I'm finding those highlights. So right now I've done this section, and now under this area, I also see this cool little curve thing happening through here. So I'm finding my highlights. I'm going to come in now and establish a little bit of the shadow that I see. I also see a pretty strong highlight through here. So this line and this line are this line and this line on the fabric, if you can see it on the screen. I hope you can. The other thing, if you notice that there are some shapes that are automatically lighter, like here, you can come in with your bigger eraser and soften those. We don't want anything to look white just yet, so we're just going to soften it. We're going to leave some charcoal on it. Now the technique that Miss T is teaching you, search for highlights first and then put in the shadows, is only one technique. And that's the cool thing about drawing. We could sit and all learn these processes together, but the reality is there are numerous ways to approach this. There's no right or wrong. So if you want to try a different method that you've seen or that you want to experiment with, then I encourage you do it. So now I'm going to come in and find my shadow areas back through here. I'm only using vine charcoal so far. You guys have learned enough about charcoal to realize that it is somewhat messy. So when I come in and add things in like this, add more charcoal beside of a light highlight, I'm going to eventually probably have to re-erase it because it will get smeared, and that's okay. Now I'm going to come over here to this area. This shape is darker than this part because more light's hitting here, so I'm going to leave that like it is. I see that through here there's a little bit of additional shading. I am not looking at this overall as, ooh, a piece of fabric. I'm looking at dark and light shapes that I see. Don't freak yourself out, okay? It's just like when you draw portraits of people. If you think, oh, I'm drawing this person, you get intimidated. But if you think in terms of, I'm just looking for areas that I see light, areas that I see dark, it makes it very much more manageable. And over here I see a little bit of shadow. And now what I want to do, I want to make sure you can already tell that this is starting to look a little bit more fabric, but what it's missing is what I call the roll or the fold. When you think of fabric, we want our eye movement to be directional. Oh, I need to put a little bit of shadow down here actually so you can see this better. Now, do you see how when I look at my fold lines, the highlight here, I've just got a solid line. It's very bold, very stark. I want to make it look like it's curving and rounding, and I want to make it look more three-dimensional and believable. And that's when we're going to come in with our eraser and do what Ms. T calls feathering. Feathering is where you're using very light, soft marks, and you're moving them in one direction. Okay, not the band, but the way that you move your pencil. So I'm going to come in now and I'm going to feather over my lines. If your eraser stops working or gets dirty, clean it off and then continue working. And I actually don't like that eraser at all. Ticonderoga erasers are the best. So I am softening that. This eraser is making me unhappy. Do you see the way when I come in with my pencil and soften that at the top and feather it, it's starting to look like it curves over and curves down. I'm going to leave a few of these a little more dramatic so you can see it. Now you as the artist, you get to decide, hey, that's too bold, or you might say, hey, I want it even more stark. Clean your eraser. I'll do this section so you can see this. Feather that over, break that top part. And maybe I think that these lines look a little too bold. I can come in and blend those a little to soften it. Do you see the way that makes it look like it's curving, like it's rounding over? Can you see that on the screen? Can everybody see the approach that Ms. T used? Okay, and you can do that in several areas. Now some parts, like maybe through here, if this line is what I call like one of those electric looking lines, it's really, really bold and has that edge really, really solidified, then maybe you don't do as much of it. But on areas where you want it to actually curve, then you would of course use your feathering. Now this fabric that we're drawing is a more satiny kind of fabric. It's very glossy and shiny. If this were a piece of cotton, the highlights might look a little different, but you could still use these rounded edges, the feathering, to help make it look like it curves. Now you can also do a little bit of reverse feathering with charcoal on areas over here. If I want it to be a little darker, come in and put a few marks and then fade those in. Now one little trick that's cool to think about, when we do painting later in the semester, we'll use the same kind of process with our brush stroke. You always let your tool follow the direction that you want your object to curve. Be it a brush, a pencil, or a ballpoint pen. If you want something to look rounded, that's the direction you move your mark. Does everybody understand? Did this help all of you at least get started? Amazing. All right, let's get to it. Good work.